Welcome to the Pastor's Cut. We're in a sermon series right now entitled St. Luke's on Broadway. And last week I told you there was so much good stuff that I had discovered as I was working on the sermon that I didn't have time to put in the sermon, that I tried to create in a different form to come back and tell you more about all the things that I didn't get to talk about on a Sunday morning. Well, this last week we were looking at Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, and again, one of my favorite stories I couldn't work in. It's the story of how there was a man named William Charles who was born back in 1886. 1886, he was a plumber. His father had been a plumber, so he had become a plumber. And then he had a son that he named William. And rather than him becoming a plumber as his father and grandfather had been, his father, William, had found a love that he had for music. And he loved working on organs. And so he began doing that kind of on the side. It wasn't his main job. But whenever he would go work on an organ or hear of an organ concert, he would take along his son, William, with him to be able to go and hear the beautiful music, to discover how organs work. And it was this younger son, his son, William, who fell in love with music. He discovered that was his passion, that he wasn't going to be a plumber like his father and grandfather, as honorable as that may have been. He had a love for music. And so it was by the time he was 14 years old, he had actually become a very accomplished organist. He began giving recitals in churches and in cathedrals. He was so good he got a scholarship to go to college. There he earned a degree in music, he became a professor of music, and he became a church organist. A church organist at the Methodist Central Hall there in London. His full name was William Southcombe Lloyd Webber. He would get married to a Jean Johnstone. She was also an accomplished violinist and pianist. Obviously, there were lots of wonderful music genes here when they had two sons, a son Andrew and a son Julian. Julian would go on to wind up being an incredibly accomplished cellist. Andrew, of course, would be Andrew Lloyd Webber. He too found his dream in music. And when he was 17 years old, he wound up meeting Tim Rice, who was 20 years old. They formed a team, started working on trying to write music. Andrew would write the composition, would compose the music, and Tim would be the lyricist. When they were 19, Andrew was 19 and Tim was 22, they were commissioned to write a piece for a high school, Colette Court. In the end, they did. It was the beginning of Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. But it was William Lloyd Webber, Andrew's father, who provided the opportunity to have the first public performance there at the Methodist Church where he was the church organist, at Methodist Central Hall, right there in London, across the street from Westminster Abbey. That was the first official public performance of Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, the first production that Andrew and Tim would have presented to the world. And I couldn't help but think about how here was Andrew Lloyd Webber, who would wind up having a dream. And the dream was to truly be involved in theater and musicals. His hero was Richard Rodgers of Rodgers and Hammerstein. He told Tim Rice when he was 19, "I want to be the next Richard Rodgers." And he would be. What an impact he has had on musicals in London, New York, and around the world. He had that opportunity because of a father who had such a musical background and helped his son discover his love, because of a grandfather who wanted to help his son see the opportunities before him in life. And I couldn't help but think about how we as parents and grandparents have such an opportunity to bless our children and our grandchildren by affording them the opportunities to learn and experience different things, to discover their talents and how God wants to use them. The other thing that I had wanted to tell you about was that Methodist Central Hall, that incredible church. It is where Andrew Lloyd's father was a church organist. The building was broke ground on it in 1905. They started raising money in the late 1800s. They were raising money to build a Methodist church that would honor the 100-year anniversary of John Wesley's death. And so they built this building to honor John Wesley and his life. And they built it really as a convention center. There's more than 22 rooms to hold different gatherings and meetings. The main area will seat 2,300 people. But to be a church, it's an art gallery, there are offices, it's a convention center, a gathering place. It has hosted so many important gatherings through the years. People who've spoken there were people like Winston Churchill, Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi. It has hosted so many incredibly important times, but maybe none even more important than in 1946, when the first meeting of the new United Nations was held at Methodist Central Hall there in London. They would meet there for all of their sessions in 1946. Methodist Central Hall is an incredibly beautiful and historical building, and it is the place where there was the first performance in 1968 of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Some really cool and interesting sorts of things to see how I really believe God is still working through lives and in history and helping us to be a blessing in this world. This week we're going to be looking at hairspray. Hairspray is turning out to be an incredibly interesting story. I had not been that familiar with it, but in doing research, I can tell you, you're going to enjoy it. It deals with many important issues. It is based on a true experience that was going on in Baltimore in 1962 with the Buddy Dean Show. Building off of that would come this story called Hairspray. It's fun, but it's powerful and important. And we're going to be looking at Timothy and how Timothy had to wrestle with so many different issues in order to carry out his message to the world, letting God use him. And we're going to talk about how God can use each of us. It's going to be a great day. I hope to see you this Sunday as we continue on with St. Luke's on Broadway as we look at the musical Hairspray. Have a great day.